Hello and welcome to lesson 3 in this mini-series, introducing you to ceremony design and my upcoming course, Ceremony Illustration, which is due to launch at the end of March. I'm so proud of you for sticking with me on this journey. I know there's a lot to take on if you haven't used Procreate before, but I promise over time as you practice these steps and as you utilize the resources and the tools, you'll be able to pick this up really quickly and eventually be able to pull designs like this together within an hour. I hope even by now you can see how easy it is to use and navigate Procreate. You really don't need to know every single item on every single menu. We use a handful of these tools and the capabilities of Procreate to create our illustrations. This is just the tip of the iceberg with regards to the resources I'll be sharing with you in the main course, and we'll go into much more depth into the drawing process, so I can promise that you'll feel like an artist in no time. Today we'll be setting the scene for the guests by adding in some ceremony chairs and setting the stage for the floral and greeneries by creating the flower stands. You can see how by creating these kinds of visuals, you can reduce the design grey area for your clients, build creative trust with them, and gain sign-off quickly for your designs. Okay, so let's dive in. Open your Procreate app and find the canvas that we were working on last week, and let's jump back in. So again, this is the illustration that we are working towards creating. And last week, we had created the stage and the aisle ready to add the chairs. Let's turn off our aisle group and our stage group. Let's tap on that stage group and select plus to create a new layer where we're going to start creating our chairs. Let's go into our brush library. Again, always go into that ceremony sample brush set. We're going to select the chair that I've shared with you here. Let's go into our color palette and I'm going to select the third color in the top row, which is our gold color. Ensure your size is 100%, opacity is 100%, and tap on the screen. Now, if you find this chair is too large for your canvas, you can decrease the size here. Everything I do on my screen might be slightly different to your screen depending on the size of your iPad and which version of Procreate that you're using. So just like we did last week, we're going to slide to the left on this layer and select duplicate. Let's go and select that bottom layer, choose white, and then dragging that circle into our shape. Again, if you find the color spills out like here into an area you don't want it to, you keep your stylus on the screen when you drag the color into the shape and just reduce it down to the left until it only fills the outline of the chair. Let's go back into our layers and select plus. Tap on that middle layer and we select clipping mask. And again, it means all the colors we're now going to add are only going to be referenced in the white that we filled the shape with. So now let's select our watercolor brush. And if you press and hold this circle, it will take you back to that original gold color, or alternatively, just go and select it from your color palette. Select a size so that we can fill the shape, opacity back up to 100%. The very first thing we're going to do is just color in the whole shape. Next, we're going to select the fourth color along, which is a slightly darker shade of gold. Let's reduce the size down. And now what we're going to imagine, and I generally keep this the same in all of my illustrations, is that we have a light source in the top right. So for example, the sun is shining from the top right down across our chair this way. So generally everything this side of our chair is going to be a little bit darker than the top right. And again, we're not creating photorealistic illustrations. This is not fine art. This is a concept illustration. So all we're doing is adding depth and layers here so that you actually end up with a beautiful output to show your clients. It doesn't have to be perfect, but as always, the more time you spend on this and the more intricate you want to make these items, such as this chair, obviously the more realistic it will look in the end. But for now, with a smaller brush size, all we want to do is go down the left-hand side of these chair legs. And again, you can do this really quick, or you can take as much time as you like. But all I'm doing right now is just showing that there's a light source and that this gold chair has reflective properties. So basically the under edge and the left hand side of all the parts of the chair, just very quickly add that darker colour to, again down the left hand side of this chair leg. And we're going to do that same process again, but with the darkest gold. So this colour here, and this is how you add much more depth. The more varieties of the colour you add in, the kind of more realistic this will look at the end. But you might be on site at this point, just creating a really quick concept illustration. You might be in front of your client, just giving them a quick overview of the thoughts you've had about their ceremony design. So this really doesn't have to take too much time. And now we're going to go and do the opposite. We're going to select this fifth colour along here. And now we're going to show that there's a light source. Again, the sun is kind of coming from this angle. So you can just kind of pull this lighter colour down the right hand side and the top edges of our chair here. Obviously that seat pad there will be having a lot of light bouncing off it. And again, this is just a really quick demonstration. So you can see we've added our highlights and our shadows to this chair. Now let's select this smudge tool, select wet smudge, which I will add to this ceremony sample brush set. Reduce the size down. And then all you're going to do is just with a very kind of light pressure, lifting on and off the screen, you're basically just coming in and kind of blending those colours together so that they're not really harsh. You're kind of starting to make it look really realistic. And it can literally be one sweep across each chair leg. You can actually fix some areas with this smudge brush if you've kind of gone over the edge. But really all we want to do very quickly is blend those shadows and highlights. And there you go, you can see really quickly how you can colour and add a realistic look to a chair. Now for slightly more advanced techniques, which again we'll go into much more detail in the course, what I might want to do at this point is just amend this colour. So I'm on this clipping mask and I'm going to select this magic wand, hue, saturation and brightness. And just to make this pop a little bit more, I'm going to increase the brightness up and just tweak that saturation there. So I'm happy with this chair as it is. So now I'm going to go and swipe right on these three layers as we did with the stage and the aisle. And I'm going to group that into one group and I'll rename that chair. So now we can go turn our stage and our aisle back on, because now we want to place these chairs alongside the aisle. So one trick I have is basically this chair group that we've just created will become your template. you'll leave it at this size and with these 3 layers underneath it. Because if you ever want to come back and tweak these colors, make changes to the chair, you can do it in this kind of group here. But as we duplicate these chairs out, what I'm going to do is swipe left on the group, select duplicate, and now we've got 2 identical groups. On one of these groups, if you tap, you can select flatten. So now, whereas this group holds the 3 layers below it, the outline, the color, and then where we did that white color drop, those 3 layers have now been flattened into just one single layer, which now we can duplicate out. And this is a great way of managing your layers, because eventually, like, there's only so many layers that you can add in Procreate, and this does depend on your iPad size and how much storage you have on it. So you always want to keep on top of your layers and try and kind of use as few as possible, whilst being able to have the opportunity to go back into any of these kind of template pieces and make changes to them. So let's reduce our canvas down by just pinching it with 2 fingers. We've now got our template chair on 1 layer. Now I want to start placing these along the aisle. So I'm going to swipe left to duplicate that chair. With it selected, I'm going to select our arrow, and with uniform selected, I'm going to take one of these corners and just reduce the size of it down. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start at the front, and I'm going to place my first chair. If you want, you can go and reference the example image. It doesn't have to be exact, just place it somewhere so it's in proportion to the stage and the aisle, and somewhere where we're not kind of blocking any of the view of this statement floral piece. So I'm actually gonna bring it down a little bit here, and then again swipe to the left to duplicate, select the arrow and move it to the right, and you'll see these really helpful blue lines up here, which are very helpful for lining up each of these pieces with each other. And there is our first row of chairs. Going back to this initial template, what happens is if you keep duplicating out and reducing the size of something, it will eventually lose kind of the crispness of the original piece. So we go back to our original template and duplicate that and work on that. I'm going to move by pressing and holding that duplicate up to the top of those layers, because everything at the top of this layer list sits in front of the stuff below it. So we want the row that we're going to place behind to be at the top. And now you'll see how this works as we reduce this chair down to just kind of go slightly larger than that first row, because with perspective these chairs will be getting larger as it goes back. And I'll just find a point where I'm happy with the placement of this chair, and again duplicate that layer, move it to the right to start creating the row. And just to show you how this works, so once you're happy with the placement of these, you actually can tap on this top one and you can select merge down. Now these 2 chairs are on this layer, and this layer, as you can see by where it sits, is visually in front of these chairs on the screen. So if we do the same with these 3 layers, this is our front row of chairs. I can see that by toggling on and off. Our second row sits visually in front of these chairs. In Procreate, that is shown by being on top of the layer below. Now let's go do this one more time. Duplicate that original large template, move it to the top because we want to see it first. I'm going to reduce that size down until it's just slightly larger than row number 2. And then using these blue lines, just find a placement that looks good, duplicate that chair and just set that row like so. And then we can just merge that down. Now we can turn off this template because we don't need to use that anymore. And then as we did by grouping these items, let's swipe right on our first, second and third rows, group those together. We can rename that if we like. I'll just call that chairs for now. And swipe left on that whole group to duplicate it. Select our arrow tool and flip horizontal. We've now created a kind of mirror of that right group. We can move that over to the left hand side, place it at the edge of our canvas, and to save layers, tap on that group and flatten. And there you can see really easily how you can create just one item in one layer and duplicate it out really quickly to create an illustration. Now we're going to go and work through that drawing process one more time, and we're going to do it to create the flower stands. So we create a new layer. We select from our ceremony sample brush set, this one called stand. And because it's going to be a gold stand, we're going to use the same colours as we used in this chair. So going into our palettes, we want the outline to be this colour. Tap that on the screen. We swipe to the left to duplicate it. And if you prefer working on a clear screen, feel free to turn off the chairs, the stage and the aisle. And that way you just have a blank canvas to work on. The next step is we select white, and in that bottom layer we add a new layer above and we set it as a clipping mask. Again, you'll see the arrow appear, and now all the gold we add will only show up where white is now. Okay, so tap and hold this colour circle here to go back to our original gold. And then, as always, using our watercolour brush, the first thing we're going to do is just fill the shape. Next, we add some shadows, again with the watercolour brush, reduce that size down. And again, the sunlight is coming from the top right, so add more of these darker colours to the left-hand side and the bottom edges of this flower stand. And we're going to do that again with even darker colour, just to make it really pop. And then to add our highlights, we select this light colour here. And just highlight edges, mostly along the top and the right hand side. And then to tidy it all up, we select our smudge brush, wet smudge brush within that brush set. We are just going to use that smudge brush to go over the shape. And blend those colours together. And then, as we did with the chairs, I want to just amend this colour so it pops. So I'm going to select that magic wand, increase the brightness up, add a touch more saturation, and now we can go and group those together I'm going to call this stand. And there we have our flower stand template. And just like we did with the chairs, we're going to duplicate this out, flatten it down, and then we'll set the 4 stands where we want to on the stage. So I'm going to swipe left on the group. I'm going to tap on that one and flatten it. We can go and turn our stage and our aisle on. We are going to duplicate that flower stand layer. And if you like, you can go and reference the final image we're working towards. You can see that there's 4 flower stands. The 2 that are central are higher, and the ones that sit slightly forward on that curved stage are shorter. And we want to leave enough room at the top of the canvas just to add these flowers and leaves into. So we select our arrow tool. We have uniform selected right now. I'm going to move this up and reduce the size down so that it sits on our stage slightly at the back. And again, feel free to reference. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just kind of using our reference right now so that we know we're on the right track. Let's duplicate that back stand. Select flip horizontal, and let's move it across the aisle. You can see those 3 blue lines are showing me that it's completely parallel to the left hand flower stand. So I'm going to just place that one there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that top layer and merge it down. So those 2 stands are on the same layer. If I select my arrow tool again, I can move it until I find that orange line, and that shows me that those flower stands are exactly spaced. Now, using that original template, let's duplicate that one more time. I'm going to again select that arrow tool, and now I want these flower stands that are closer to the front row to sit slightly wider left and forward on that stage, somewhere around there. Again, let's duplicate that, select the arrow, flip it horizontally, and we're going to move that one over to the right where those blue lines are kind of meeting up. Let's merge that down so our front flower stands are now on one layer. And again, let's just check those front flower stands are central by finding that orange line. And we can delete that layer if we need to. So now we have our back flower stands, our front flower stands, as per the reference. And we've created our chairs left and right of the aisle. So that is it for this week. I hope that you've started to get used to that drawing process and are starting to enjoy using all the brush stamps and adding in the colours. Next week we're going to do the bit I love the most by adding the greenery and the flowers to the aisle and the flower stand. So have a lovely week and keep an eye on your inbox next week for another tutorial where we'll add those flowers and greenery.